Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani and welcome to this week's Succession video a day late. I was actually on an airplane while the episode aired and then whole comedy of errors. And by the time I got back, it was after midnight, so I couldn't watch it. So here I am, a day late. It's not going to happen again. So I think we could probably, it's two things go up from the top. First of all, best piece of advice I've ever heard on a TV show. Stop sending people your blood. Good place to start. But I think the other thing we can look at in this episode is stages of grief. And never did I think that power grab would be part of the stages of grief. So let's break everyone down in their narcissistic lens, which isn't hard to do. So let's talk a little bit about Kendall. You know, Kendall's back to being his sort of power bro self, right? So his kind of grandiose, superficial play is to kind of say these ridiculous things. In fact, I wrote one of them down. I was so tired of listening to them, like, yeah, like feel the force, that sort of stuff. That's Kendall's game, and he really, really is enjoying it. It reminds me of sort of take your kid to work day, except the parent's now dead, and he can sort of get to play at that grandiose game. Now, Roman, that he is such the dark horse for me. This character has by far become the most complicated, nuanced character of the show. Anytime Roman's on, I drop what I'm doing to just really focus, because here we're seeing something so complex play out. Roman, so trauma bonded to his father, and also trauma bonded to his father's ghost. And it's really interesting to see Roman kind of emerge. Roman, he of the dick pics, sort of emerge as the voice of reason, as actually making some interesting business decisions, but yet there's a real loyalty and fidelity he feels to his father's memory. And there's sort of like this sadness you feel for him, because it's not just the trauma bond, but this sort of fidelity he had to this father who was never quite able to see him wholly, and yet Roman sort of holding on for dear life. And you know, and it's interesting here because I think in Roman's also taking on this interesting mediational role. He's showing another different kind of a loyalty to Shiv. So sort of like my narcissism meter on Roman is turning down a little bit. I think it's obviously it's absolutely there, but he's actually kind of trying to play by these rules where you can see Kendall kind of chomping at that bit and not loving having to always bring Shiv in. Shiv remains, again, very much in her father's form. In fact, her willingness to just sell off ATN, which was Logan's kind of baby going into the deal. The one part he wanted to hold back, she's like, I don't care. You know, we just do whatever. Roman is sort of torn about the whole thing. Kendall's still trying to sort of figure out if he wants to be in charge of the whole thing and not sell it at all. Of course, we got our little entitlement grab with their overly small rooms, which, let me tell you, what I wouldn't give to stay in a super cool glass-fronted cabin in Norway, but the small rooms, a little bit of that kind of narcissistic entitlement popping out there. And poor Connor in this narcissistic family system. Remember, when we look at family systems approaches to therapy, it's really all about how power is divided up in a family, right? So, I mean, a systems therapist, you know, like Mnuchin or Satir or any of those old school family, you know, family systems folks would have had a field day with this family. So Connor's always there. Connor is always holding the bag on the most undesirable tasks. And now it is, you know, dressing up dad for the funeral and still having to sort of manage issues like, do we put him in a kilt or not? I found it interesting that Willa kind of stepped up for a second and said, don't let them kind of talk it down to you, but Connor will remain sort of the court jester of this family. I did like the little dig someone got in at Tom. Really his vulnerable narcissism always popping through. And when one of the people at the meeting on the Lucas side said, oh, you're, you know, when Tom introduced himself as Tom of ATM, they thought of him as Tom of Siobhan. And there could be no greater narcissistic injury for him. We see that when he kind of does that little slap on Siobhan, but then also, was that whiskey in Siobhan's glass? I mean, Siobhan, like, intervention time. I don't think Siobhan took the cocaine. I think she kind of took the little thing and was polite and sort of put it back down. But it felt whiskey-ish in his glass. And it felt whiskey-ish in her glass. I don't know, but Tom's kind of feeling that not only is he feeling competition, but competition from the alpha of all alphas. So, but Tom, not okay to sort of grab her ear like that. I have to say that Lucas is shaping up to be an interesting new narcissistic character, right? So he's sort of he is the kind of the dude bro narcissist, which tends to be a mashup of grandiose, a little bit of communal in there. It's almost like a cocktail. Like mostly your base is grandiose, some communal on top, a little bit of malignant in there. And you might even see a tiniest bit of vulnerable, but it's almost like spraying on the vermouth with a spray bottle. It's really light, but he is an interesting hybrid. And Lucas plays this power game as well as any of them do, and maybe even a little bit better. So he's almost like this new haunting iteration, but not nearly as good or cool as their dad kind of thing, sort of popping up and still creating this antagonism. But let's keep in mind, Logan still is always going to be pulling these strings from the grave. Roman will still remain loyal to their dad. Kendall will still feel his father's kind of shadow at his back, and Shiv will still emulate her father. So in these systems, that complicated relationship with the narcissistic parent long after the dead will sustain. Granted, the dude's only been dead a week, but I think we can plan on that continuing. I mean, dad's going to still be pulling the strings from the grave. I did like the way they framed the shot with the disgusting brothers next to the two, I think they were pigs on a spit, sort of like that, you know. Again, I don't think the showrunners on the show miss a damn thing. Greg the chameleon. Greg's always been a chameleon, but it's pretty clear that he's trying to butter his bread on two sides. Tom is definitely in a weak position on a chessboard. This piece is doing you no favors. So Greg is now sort of wandering over to the quad squad and is willingly doing some of Kendall's billing, which takes us almost back to the very beginning when he was doing other people's billing at the beginning, trying to keep Kendall sober or whatever the hell he was doing at the beginning of this of the whole show. But I do think that it's, you know, with Greg, we're going to see the constant chameleoning, and, you know, in that way with Greg, that constant shape shifting, becoming whatever he needs to be and whoever he needs to be to maintain advantage. That really is starting to show how Greg's narcissism is going to manifest. I'm no longer giving him the benefit of doubt on his age. I think homie's narcissistic. We also see that it's this new power, especially that Kendall and Roman have. When their father was there as almost the thing to bounce it off of, it was very different. They almost seem to be withering under it a little bit. And Kendall seems to be a little bit better at triangulation, right? But Roman, in this sort of odd kind of loyalty to his dad, is taking on this really fascinating role, right? I'm coming back to that just because it's jumping out at me so much. And so the Roman and his grief, you know, we talk about the stages of grief, right? It's typically denial. They've all gone through that whole first day, the wedding, that denial bit. Well, Roman's sliding into anger at this point. And Roman's already kind of an angry guy. Clearly some stuff happened to him early in childhood, I'm sure, if he was abused. And that has come out in many, many different ways. And he's still like this idea of throwing their father under the bus. All of those things are really sort of abhorrent to him. I sit there, this show has made me so cynical, there are no words. I had to wonder, was Roman, while Lucas was, you know, taking a piss, while Roman was talking to him and sharing his absolute disgust and contempt and all of that for Lucas, I found that scene fascinating because I really was vacillating on, was this a genuine play? Had Roman genuinely had it? Especially Lucas calling his dad a prick and all of that, or was this posturing? Given how Roman's character is unfurling, I do think that Roman does continue to feel this trauma bonded loyalty to his dad, and he wasn't having it. And so he just sort of said what he said. And I think that at that point, he was kind of done. And so he was willing to join forces with Kendall on whether, okay, they keep the company, different things motivating them. Kendall's narcissism taking him in the area of him actually believing he could run that company. I'm on the fence on whether Kendall actually has the capability. I think he's good at all the grandiose bro talk. I wonder about his leadership capability. Honestly, I think Roman might be in the better position to run the damn company. And but whether that was intentional or whether that was Roman posturing to get the deal out of Lucas, I still feel there was enough genuine there and ended up working to their advantage. It was sort of fun to watch the sort of old timers on the board, sort of everyone trying to take credit, and everyone. And it is so interesting in narcissistic systems how absolutely self-serving everybody in these systems is. They're trying to get their buyouts, they're trying to get their golden parachutes, they're trying to retain their power. So there's never a sense of whether these are necessarily good business decisions. I'm not convinced about whether this is a good business decision. So it's really going to be interesting to see what they do now that they got a much higher number, a number that far exceeded what their father would think they could have gotten. But they're giving away ATN, which in many ways, talk about, like, I think that metaphor of Lucas standing there pissing was definitely a metaphor of pissing on their father's grave. And so that's what we're about to see. But I'm very curious to see how Roman is going to sort of snip away at these trauma bonds or not. It was fascinating to see him feel that Lucas was partly responsible. That's still almost like that denial, anger, almost going into bargaining, like trying to make sense of what this all is about. I'm not guessing any of these people are going to get to that final stage of grief, which is finding meaning, but I think we may very well get to depression, and that might be coming up in the next week or so. So everyone was showing their colors. Roman is showing a subtlety to his character more than any other. Shiv, full on narcissistic, in there with really kind of continuing the total line of dad. And what's interesting to me is that the way Shiv is kind of getting in there and getting into her whole flirty thing with Lucas reminds me of a few seasons back when Logan was kind of fooling around with the person played by Holly Hunter, and I don't remember who she was, what she was, but she was involved in a company, some sort of deal. And so I think that Shiv's going to do anything and whatever seduction, cleverness, manipulation to get it done. Very, very much like dad. Roman may be faithful, but I don't think he's anything like his father. So those are my thoughts a day late on Succession this week. I thought it was fantastic. As always, episode, not a detail miss. Makes me want to go to Norway. And I'll see you next week because I'll be able to watch it. Thanks again.